Greetings, everyone. So I finished knitting the short sleeve yesterday, and I sort of pinned it on here with these stitch markers just so I could see what it would look like, see if it looked good, and I actually really like it. So I think we've cracked the sleeve problem. I'm just removing it now. There, it's off. And now I have a gazillion ends to weave in so that I can actually sew it on. So this is what the sleeve actually looked like in the end. Getting my weaving in supplies. So you can see, zillion ends. You can tell I did the bottom bit actually in the round and then went back and forth for the actual sleeve cap. Where's my favorite little needle here? Come on. There it is. I like the one with the bent tip. All right. Where should we start? So I'll zoom in more. So I thought I'd weave in for a little while, and then when I get bored of that, I will cast on for the other sleeve. pulled this sleeve apart a few times and the wool was recycled, which is why there were so many breaks, which means I've got a few more ends to weave in than I otherwise would have had. But I was trying to make every bit of use of the yarn that I could. Could have tried spit felting it together. Like, this yarn is pretty grabby, but when I've done it with the Rowan felted tweed, it ends up kind of thick and rigid, and you know, I feel like when you spit felt, it's really hard to not end up with a bit that's thicker. The good news about this wool being so sticky and the color being so flecky, I don't have to be too precious about weaving in. I don't have to worry too much about weaving in just behind the same color. Like, I've checked it, and on the front, you can't tell, you know? It makes no difference, so makes weaving in a little faster than if you're trying to be very careful about where you weave. I also do have some embroidery to do on the sleeve as well. It's got that motif that the front had with 3 colors in a row. So there is a little bit of embroidery to do on this for the 3rd color. There's no way was I juggling 3 colors in the flat back and forth. Okay, I guess I'll just start on the side somewhere, huh? Should I start at the top and work down? Turn it inside out. I start at the bottom here. Hey, Melissa. This sleeve, well, I've only done the one. This one took all day yesterday. Pretty much, I don't know, 8 hours. I was watching movies and stuff at the same time. But, and granted, I made a lot of mistakes and had to fix it, so I hope the second one should go faster. Because I will remember what not to do. Yeah, I made a lot of dumb errors. A lot longer than it should, given how small it is, basically. I'm doing training this week. I'm doing this course, public speaking course at work. But I don't know if I will get, sometimes when you're doing training, you can knit. But I don't know how interactive this is. Darko may not want me to do that. Should probably be respectful and pay attention. Actually, I want to kind of weave this away from the edge because it's the cuff. I don't want that tail sort of snaking out. Just go up a bit. There we go. I'll cut it off up here. So many ends. Oh. Depressing. No, I still have another. I have to knit this sleeve again. This is only the first sleeve. So I'm gonna do another one to match. Then I need to sew them on. Which, before I can sew them, I need to block it. So blocking is where you wash it and then you pin it out to dry nice and flat. It just evens everything up. It'll make it easier to do the sewing. So I sew the sleeves in, and then I need to pick up and knit the collar around the V-neck, knit the edging around the neckline. So no, not done yet. But I want to get this done because it's springtime here, and if I would take much longer, I won't actually get to wear it this year. I'm guessing maybe 2 weeks to finish it. I hope. This is, these things take a lot longer than people think. That's why when you ask your friend to knit you a sweater, they will probably say no. It is, depending on the pattern, a massive time investment. I'll do just a few more ends and then I'll switch to actual knitting. That'll probably be more interesting for anyone who is watching. I know weaving in ends is not the most exciting thing in the world, especially when you just see my head looking down at it. 2 more. 2 more. Look how tidy it looks once you get the ends woven in. Sort of ordering chaos. I like that. I'll just do this dark green one as well and get it out of the way. Thank you. I never used to like this part. You know, it always seemed to be a bit of a... You know, when you just want the thing done, it's like to get to the last stage and then have to like do a sort of tidying up and do these extra steps when you just want to wear the thing. Felt very frustrating to me. But now, I think the key is to just accept it as part of the process. And I do get a kind of joy out of it. It's a different kind of a joy. Like, to go from, you know, this sort of chaos to this, that's very nice. That makes me feel in control of the universe. All right, well, let's knit. So, all right, so there's our sleeve again. This is what we're going to be duplicating. Okay, I have my circular needle ready to go. I've got my handy dandy pattern here on the iPad. I'm taking extensive notes as I go. Okay, and to start we need... I need camel and gray. There's camel. And I did. The exciting story of the week is I think I managed to find the last ball of gray in like all of Germany. Because it's, you know, we talked about this, I think last Sunday. I was having a really hard time finding it. I thought for a moment I was going to have to get someone from the UK or Australia to send to me. But managed to finally find a German shop with color 159 in stock. All right, so I'm going to do a long tail cast on for this. I need to cast on 108 stitches with a long tail, which is fun because you have to gauge how long of a tail to leave. And, oh look, I've got a knot there. That's a pain in the butt. Might just break it there and not use that bit. Pull out a good arm length there, so it should be all right. Okay, I'm gonna make my slip knot. So take my loop, twist it, reach through, pull up a slip knot. All right, and I'm doing a long tail cast on here. So with a long tail, you make a backwards loop. So I've got, this here is the tail. This end is connected to the ball of wool. So you're basically sort of casting on with a backwards loop and knitting at the same time. So I make a backwards loop with my left thumb over the needle, and then I'm gonna more or less knit from that position, and then the loop goes over and off. There are people who can do this one-handed. I prefer doing it two-handed. And if you want me, hey Woben, I wondered if you were up. So you were tagging me on some Instagram contests. Thank you for that. And I saw you were tatting. Wow. You are just all over the fibercraft spectrum here. Knitting, crochet, tatting, weaving. I admire tatting, but that's one. Definitely, as my eyes are getting worse, I think I will not be doing any tatting anytime soon. That. Sometimes you mess up the long tail because you don't actually get the loop over. So I'm deliberately trying to do this fairly loose. We've discussed this. I'm a tight knitter by nature. You do not want your cast on to be tight, so I'm kind of doing it deliberately loose. I need to find the German equivalent of like Spotlight or Lincraft because I need some sort of generic craft supplies for the sock monkeys that I'm making. And I don't know what the German equivalent is. I need to find that here locally. Yeah, and I need to do some programming too. I have some talks. I have a talk coming up at the end of the month. I really need to work on the demo for. Hopefully I can find some time for that this week. Good news is I now have plenty of all the colors that I need to finish this, so I'm in no danger of running out of wool, which also meant that like before I was trying to swap out some colors on the sleeves. Don't have to do that hackery anymore. Did it again. Because I'm talking and not watching. How many do we got? What are you programming? You recommended an RPG system. Oh, fun. Game. You're making a game, yeah? Role-playing game? All right, I'm going to count again, too. 108. And look at that tail left over. It's actually my very mild superpower to know how long to make my long tail cast-ons. So I'm pleased about that. All right, 108. That's what I was going for. So we're going to join for knitting in the round. And since I'm using like a 60 centimeter circular, I'm going to pull out for a magic loop. And of course, the key here is to make sure that we are not twisted. So what I'm doing is I'm scooching the stitches along the needles, and I'm actually making sure that my cast on edge, you can see looks like sort of a little rope edge here. And I'm making sure that runs along the inside. So there we go. So if you can see that, the little rope edge is all along the inside. So there's no bits that are twisted around the needle like that. It all runs continuously along the inside of that loop. And as long as that's the case, we shall not have a twist. So what I did on the other sleeve, and I'll do it on this one, and you can do this when you join, you avoid, yeah, you can knit a couple rows, especially if I'm doing like a lot, like if I'm doing, when I did the body and the body was like, 300 stitches or something, definitely would. This one's not too bad. Like I can actually eyeball it and see it, so it's fine. But yeah, you can knit a few rows. So what I'm going to do is actually going to swap the last 2 stitches on each needle just to sort of, join it together a little firmer. And so what I might do is I might grab another needle tip. Is that another needle? Yeah, that's another needle, 3rd needle. So I'm going to take the stitch off the top needle. I'm going to transfer it to the bottom needle. And I'm going to take the last stitch on the bottom needle, which is the cast on, so I can pull it big, and pull it over. So I've just kind of swapped the last 2, and I've pulled one over the other, and that just helps join it together and lock it together a little tighter there. So now I'm ready to start knitting. And so I am going to be knitting and make sure I'm not knitting with the tail. Okay, that's the tail. And so, actually that stitch is twisted. I'm just gonna go. So I'm ready to start knitting. And I'm actually gonna be doing knit 2, purl 2 ribbing. So, it's gonna be a bit awkward the first row or 2, but once we get going, it'll be fine. First row or 2 is always the worst. Knit 2. And remember, when we switch from the purl back to the knit, the wool goes back to the back side of the needle. And when I switch to the purl, it comes between the tips to the front of the needle. Otherwise, we make inadvertent yarn overs, and that's not going to work. So I'm going to do 2 or 3 rows, and then I'm going to introduce the gray like I did on that one. So that's what we're aiming for. We're doing that cast on edge at the bottom, and then we're going to introduce the gray. So 1 knit, 2 knit. I mean, this is technically the 3rd time I've knitted this sleeve because, I knitted one version completely and didn't like it. Like when I pinned it against the body, the patterns actually lined up too closely to the patterns on the body. It was not discordant enough. I think it looks better when they actually differ. Let me show you what I mean. So I've got a picture, the picture I took last night. Let me just bring that up. So there you can see that's what the other sleeve looks like. And none of the motifs line up from the sleeve to the body, which is what I wanted. They were closer on the previous version, and that actually, because they're in different colorways, it actually made it look wrong. So having them be more separated, I think looks better. Well, and this is a unique look anyway, like having the sleeves not match the body. I've never, there are very few Fair Isles I've seen that actually do that. Okay, so I finished one needle, so now I'm just going to scooch the other needle along. That is the essence of Magic Loop. And because this first stitch will have a tendency to want a ladder, I'm just going to pull that first one, just pull it a little extra tight to close up the join, so I don't end up with a long gap there. Other big thing that I did this week in terms of my streaming setup, you might notice, is I got a green screen now. An actual green screen, which is why in the upper left you don't have a boring blank wall behind me anymore. I can replace it with something, but for now, I've just hidden it. I was playing with it earlier today as I was getting it set up to see how it all works. I was just getting tired on team calls of seeing nothing but my wall behind me. Knits. Now 108 is divisible by 4, so if I have counted correctly, this should work out perfectly here as we get to the end. And 4 left, 2 knits, 2 purls, perfect. I mean, if you end up with one too many, you can always cheat and just knit 2 together, purl 2 together. If you end up with one too few, you're kind of screwed. You can create a stitch, I suppose. I would probably at that point undo it and redo it to get it right. Okay, that's one row down. And again, first stitch of the round. I do the first stitch, then I put the needle in for the second, and then I give it a little extra tug just to close up that gap. we look at my previous sleeve, so if I look at the bit, get a pointer. So if I look at the bit below the gray, I've got 2 purl bumps before the gray starts. So, and if you look at the bit I've just done, I've got 2 purl bits. So good. I need to do this row and then I'll be ready to introduce the gray. But let's, why do you need to avoid it twisting? Well, Felicity, do you know what a Mobius strip is? You can actually, instead of knitting a loop, if you introduce a twist, you end up knitting a Mobius strip. So it actually, it won't be a sleeve. It'll have a twist in it like that, and you don't want that. So it has to have no twists in it. I mean, there are patterns where you deliberately do that. Like if you're making a cowl, like to go around the neck, oftentimes people will deliberately put a twist in that. So an infinity cowl. But for a sock or a cuff or anything that you actually want to be in around, no twists. No twists, or you end up knitting a Mobius strip, which is cool if you're trying to illustrate a mathematical principle, but not so cool for actual garments for a human being. Yeah, it's hard to visualize, but the first time you do it, you'll be like, I get it now. You will never, well, you will try never to do it again. It still happens. Especially as Woban was saying, if you're doing something with like hundreds of stitches, it can be really difficult to tell. Or a dark wool, sometimes really hard to tell if it's twisted or not. And in that case, what's helpful is actually just knit flat back and forth for a few rows. And then once you've got a little bit more on the needles, it's easier to tell. And then you start knitting in the round and you can just sew up that last little bit afterwards. So I've done that. It can be very handy. This one was done that way? I probably did this jumper in the way. This hoodie, because this was knitted in the round. And I feel like, yeah, I probably did it that way. Okay. The other half of this row, and then we're ready to introduce the gray. So just started with 2 knits, now I got 2 purls. This is another area when you're going between the needles where you can inadvertently introduce a yarn over. So for example, if my working wool was twisted around the cable like that, and then I went to do my purl, I will actually create an extra loop on that needle. So you want to just make sure that the working wool is where you expect it to be without any extra loops around the needles. So for a purl, it's in front. Make the first purl, put my tip in, and then pull it a little extra tight to close up that gap. We're aiming for a continuous spiral around the needle. No extra loops or twists. Now, if I were doing these sleeves out of a single color, I probably would have done both at the same time to make sure that they are exactly the same length and match. Because this has a pattern, I can tell that they match, so I don't need to, I can do them one at a time. Okay, that is the first 2 rows done. So if I spread it out here, you can now see that we have a circle. Let me go zoom out again. So we have a continuous loop and round, no twists. That's exactly what we want. Cool. All right. Now, if you put this down and you forget which needle you're about to knit onto, just remember the working wool is always coming off that last stitch you knitted. So that means I've knitted this stitch last, so I'm now going to come around to this front needle. And it's time to introduce the gray. Now I'm going to do a trick here. So we're going to be doing corrugated ribbing. That's what you call this, where you're doing knit purl ribbing in 2 different colors. Okay. So I'm going to do my 2, so the knits are going to be in the camel and the pearls are going to be in the gray. So I'm going to do my 2 knits like normal. Okay, and now I would normally do my 2 pearls. So let me get the tail and show you the trick. There is a trick here. All right, so if I go ahead and do this as a purl, so I'll join in my gray. Come on. So I join in my gray and okay, then that goes to the back, and then I would do 2 knits. And then I would pick up the gray and do 2 pearls. And I want you to have a look at this. There, because there's a problem with this. The problem with this is look at the bottom of the grays. At the base of each gray stitch, there is a blip of beige, a blip of the camel. And if you look at this one, I don't have that. When the gray starts, it just starts smoothly, no blip. And the blip is when you're changing colors in purl. You get a bump of the previous color. And it looks untidy. And so there is a way around it, and it's very simple. It's simply to knit the entire first row. So the first row is actually a cheat, but guess what? You will never notice. So I'm going to undo that. And in the purl stitches in gray, I am actually going to knit for just this first row instead of purling. Joining in my gray. I'm going to go back to my camel. I'm going to knit with my gray. And so now where the gray comes in, there's no blip. You know, it's just smooth. You don't get an interruption to the gray. So we're just gonna go the whole way around doing it this way. And then on the second row with the other color is when I will start actually purling. Remember not to purl on this row. So it's just the first row you're gonna do with all knits. And I'm actually keeping both wools in the right hand. I find it for corrugated, it's not that hard to actually just use the right hand for both. And I'm trying to keep the stitches spread out along the right hand needle, so all those floats across the back, I'm not pulling those too tightly. Why did I not start this bowl from the center? And I'm always keeping the gray throughout the sleeve. I will be keeping the accent color on the bottom, which means I'm not twisting these as I'm using them. I'm always keeping the gray underneath the camel. You just want to be consistent. And for me, the consistent thing is the accent color always comes from underneath or goes in the left hand, and the background color or main color is on top and goes in the right hand. That's what we're doing, two-handed. Now, corrugated ribbing will never have the elasticity of normal ribbing. It just doesn't, because you're using the two colors. So it's not going to pull in the way a normal ribbed cuff will. Okay, there's the first half of that row done. Scooch along, and just to show you again, the gray comes out smoothly of the camel. There's no bump, and it'll be fine. You'll never notice that once it's actually knitted up like this. You can't even tell that that first row of gray is a knit. Unless you're a knitter and you know that there should be a blip if it were a purl. Haha, sneaky trick. Okay, and then we're actually on the gray stitch. And I won't pull this too tight because remember, this is actually, I'll pull it a little tight, but I don't want it to join real tight because it's actually a float across the back. Floats and magic loop, you just got to be a little careful. So each time I'm just using my index finger to change which working wool I'm actually going to knit with. Wool's getting stuck on itself. There we go. Oh, don't hunch, Kris. Okay, we are at the end of that crucial setup row for the corrugated ribbing. Done. So now we can actually start doing 2 knits, 2 purls as we normally would in ribbing. So I'm just going to break off that tail. I did leave my cast on a little extra long. Okay. Sort this out. Okay, so now I'm going to do my 2 knits with the camel to start the row as normal. Again, pull that first one just a little bit tight. Then, instead of doing 2 knits, now I'm actually going to do 2 purls for the gray. So I'm actually now doing purls on the grays. And I will again be keeping both yarns in my right hand, trying to keep my floats not too tight. But now when I switch to the gray, I have to remember to pull it in front for doing purls. Remember, we're not creating yarn overs, so it goes to the back. Then I switch to the camel. So I could also do this by putting the purl yarn around my neck or in my left hand, or however you like doing purls continental style, but I actually find for corrugated ribbing, I just keep them both in my right hand. It's not too tedious. Every now and then. Oops, looks like we're gonna have a knot in the camel coming up. There are some joins, as I said, just because I have reclaimed this wool a couple of times now. I'm just gonna break it actually. Break the knot out. So I will join that in when I come to that point. Front for the gray. Okay, there's actually that's tail's a little short. I'm gonna go back. And what I'll do is I'll actually join it between the 2 stitches. I'll do one in the old yarn and one in the new yarn. And the gray, whoops, then the gray comes in between. What I'll do is I'll stop and I'll just tie those 2 tails together. So those are the 2 ends that I've just done from the old yarn and the new yarn. Just tie them in a little bow. Just to keep them out of the way. There we go. Okay. Back to it. Gray. Now the question is, how many rows of corrugated ribbing do I actually do? You might think I would have kept track the first time and written it down, but I did not. What we'll do is we'll actually just reverse engineer it from the first one. I'm actually going to move those 2 stitches to the back needle. Here we go. So if I get the other sleeve done and we look at the gray, so if I count the purl bumps on the gray, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I just need to make sure that I'm going to do 5 purl rows of the gray. Easy way to tell. And then I'll be ready to start the first motif. The trick of knitting, you don't have to be very organized with writing things down if you can learn to read your knitting. All right, so we're gonna do 2 camel. I really should have done a center pull ball. Okay. And again, I'm just keeping these yarns always in the same orientation. Great seeing you for this. I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for joining. Okay, first row done with the pearls. Not really on camera, sorry. Okay. I'm gonna zoom out for a while. That one. So when I'm doing magic loop or socks on two circulars, just when I finish a row, pull it through to the cable. It'll be a lot easier to figure out where you're at when you pick up your knitting. Okay, ready for starting with some knits. Two rows of corrugated ribbing done. 3 to go. stop and weave in a couple ends just to mix things up. Go back to my that one. Just get too bored doing the same thing for too long. I said I knitted for 8 hours yesterday to knit this sleeve, so I'm kind of actually a little knitted out at the moment. Okay. I'll go ahead and turn this one inside out. Sort this bit out at the bottom of the armpit. So I need to do some embroidery on that bottom motif as well. So I'll get the ends woven in on it, and then I can do a little bit of embroidery there. Always looks a bit messier than it really is, these ends. I mean, it's the armpit. You're never gonna see this. Well, I guess unless I lift my arm up. So when I have two ends coming like this, I actually like to cross them over. So I'll take the camel that way and the brown that way. Because if you think about it, when you're sort of breaking one and joining in another, if they had been continuous, or contiguous, that's kind of what you want to make it like in terms of the tension. So I'm going to follow the camel back, follow them in opposite directions is what I'm saying. Plus it means you won't have a less chance of having a gap or a hole there that's noticeable. And then the brown we said would go sort of north. This sounds like a movie soundtrack, really. I don't know what the heck I'm listening to today. Sounds like some sort of James Bond theme. Kind of. So at the actual armpit edge there, I've casted off stitches. So if you look at that edge, if we look at it from the front, you'll see there's sort of a gap in the middle. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, I'll cross them over when I weave them in to try and just close that gap up a little bit. And I mean, that will disappear into the seam when I sew this, sew the sleeve in as well. So the camel's going to go that way and then I want to go that way. Might actually even go into the cast off edge there just to close that gap up a little bit. Okay. Okay. I got the tail end there to weave in. I can do that. So that was my cast on. So I'll feed it through to the back. And you really can't tell because I did that join, that crossover join. You know, I don't get that sort of gap you sometimes do. All right, let's get this tail woven out of the way. Kind of going on a diagonal with this to get it away from the cuff edge. Is there anything else in this first motif, really? Not really. I mean, I could do that one there at the edge. And that blue. So what I want to do is I want to embroider the bit in there. And so I just want to make sure I've got all the ends woven in for that motif before I embroider on top of it. And that blue, I'll do that blue too, just to get it out of the way. Okay, there's the ends woven in for that first motif at the bottom. And so I will go ahead and do the embroidery because I want to see what it looks like. So the embroidery is here, and if I color it in, it'll be a little easier to see. It's actually in pink. There, so just as we did on the, if I show you the body of the jumper, So on the body of the jumper, it's this motif here with the X's and then the 4 blue diamonds. So if you knit that, that's 3 colors in 1 row. And 3 colors in 1 row is an absolute pain in the ass. So I didn't do it that way. I just did 2 colors across the row. And instead we're gonna embroider it in. So I need the pink. Here's the pink. And I'm gonna break off. Actually, do I have a knot at all? Yes, I do. Perfect. It would have been easier to get these knots undone if I hadn't cut my nails today. There we go. All right, I got a bit of pink here. All right. So there should be 1 in the brown, 3 over from the center stitch. So that will be 1, 2, 3. Yes. So I'm using duplicate stitch embroidery here, or Swiss darning it's often called, where basically I'm going to be going right on top. I'm going to just sew over the existing stitch. So it will be double thick there. No, you're not really, this pink doesn't really show up much against the brown, does it? Mm-hmm. Zoom in. Just go around in a circle. It'll be easier. So basically you come out of the bottom, the hole of the stitch below the one you want to duplicate. So here I want to go across this stitch. So those 2 legs there, I want to actually stitch on top of them. So I've come out of the hole in the stitch below it. So I've come out of there. Now I'm going to put my needle under the 2 legs above, pull the thread through, and I want to pull it tight. I want to match the tension so it sits on top of the stitch underneath, and then I go back in the same place, and I'm going to come up where I'm going to make my next stitch. And there, you were literally just covering it. So again, come out of the stitch below, you go under the legs of the stitch above, and don't pull it too tight. It's not perfect, like it won't completely cover the stitch sometimes, like you'll still be able to see a bit of the old stitch underneath, and obviously it'll be double thick here, but it's a lot easier than knitting 3 colors in 1 row, trust me. we go. So there's one completed pink cross. You can see a little, it's not a lot of contrast, this pink. Duplicate stitching stitches that are kind of going into the decreases, but you know what, it'll be fine. You are not going to see these under the armpit anyway. Make sure I'm coming out of the right stitch. I mucked one up in the front when I did the body. Just being very careful this time. Whack the camera, sorry. Like I said, just gently adjust the tension until it sits as best as you can get it right on top of the stitch underneath. Never gonna be perfect. But in a wool like this, you don't notice anyway. Finish the last two stitches on this first pink one. Okay, this is 1, 2, 3. Finish this one. What did I do? Caught my tail. Oops. Okay, so now I need to cross a big gap. I need to get over to here. And so to do that, I'm gonna put my needle through to the back. So I'll pull that one through. Okay, so we finished those four. Those four little fleur-de-lis, however you want to call them. So now I need to get over to that next gap So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, on the back, I don't want to leave a big loop, so I'm just going to weave my wool here. Oops, that's my tail. That's my tail, right. I'm just going to go through a bit of the floats on the back side, just so I don't leave a big loop that'll catch my finger in when I'm putting the jumper on. And then where does that get it? That gets us to about the right spot. So I've just, instead of having a big loop from there to there, just woven it into a couple of the floats. Okay, I just have to remember where I'm supposed to be. So 1, 2, 3 stitches over. Yep, that's the one. Just making sure I don't come up in the wrong spot. So hard to see this pink where I'm actually stitching. This might be a daylight task. These wools are so low contrast. At least it shows up slightly better against the camel. The sleeves as a whole are a lot lower contrast than the body was, I feel like. It's like Marie Wellen had two different colorways and decided to just put them both in the same garment for the heck of it. Am I in the right spot? No. There. Okay, we finished another group of 4, so I'll go down inside. And again, I'll just sort of weave through a few floats here to get us over to where we need to be. Just get us to that over there. Maybe one more. There we are. That's better. I mean, at least it fills it in. You know, it's a little bit more visually interesting than just the plain. Keep hitting the camera, sorry. big flecky bit in that part of the wool. There we go. Here's 3 of the 4 done. Do the 4th one. Getting to the end of my wool here. And then I'll finish by knitting a few more rows of corrugated ribbing before I sign off for the night. I'm going for about, 2 hours now. Okay, there's the 4th dot done. Cool. So I need to jump over to this next gap. So again, I'll go to the inside and I'm just gonna sort of slide along a couple of these floats on the back. There we go, that should get us about over to where we need. Yep. So that's where it goes, isn't it? Yep. Make sure I come up in the right spot. And again, I don't want to pull these too tight on the back side. Like I want the tension to match the rest of the knitting. If you've just joined and you're like, why the hell is she embroidering on a knitting podcast, knitting stream? It's because this particular motif had 3 colors in a row, and 3 colors in a row is kind of a pain to knit. And so I knitted it with 2 colors, and I'm embroidering the 3rd color on afterwards because it is a hell of a lot easier. And so I'm using the technique called Swiss darning or duplicate stitch embroidery, where I'm literally just going right over the existing stitches to cover them. So it looks like it was knitted in, but it is completely a cheat. Ooh. Makes it a little thicker there, but other than that, you know, it looks like it was knitted in from the get-go. And a lot faster and easier. Okay, I'm pretty much at the end of this, so I might stop it there and use what's left as my tail to weave in. I'm just going to turn this inside out. So there's where we started. So I'll just thread that back onto the needle. Oh no, that's actually where I ended. That's fine. And I'm just gonna weave this tail back, and I'm kind of just gonna go back upon itself more or less. Weave it into some of these pearl bumps on the back side. And the great thing is, and this wool is so flecky, you will not actually notice it at all on the front. Okay, cut that off, leaving about 1 centimeter. And then, where did I start it? I started it over here, so that was where I started. So I'll weave that one in as well. And we'll knit a few rows just to end the session today. Done some tails weaving in, I've done Swiss darning, a little bit of everything. Okay, let's call it a night in terms of sewing because my eyesight is fading fast. So just to show you what I've got here. So again, this is our short sleeve for Orkney. Actually, flip it over so you can see it with the embroidery. Oh, that looks better, doesn't it? So yeah, I've still got to do the other half of the embroidery, so there's a little bit more to do there, the pink dots. Finish weaving in the rest of those ends, and then that'll be ready to block and sew in. So what I'm doing now is I'm actually knitting the other sleeve to match. So I'll leave that there and go back to the knitting. So as you can see, I've cast it on for the other sleeve. So I'm on the corrugated ribbing part, so that's the gray and the camel there. And so I've got to do 5 rows of the gray, and I've done 2 so far. So 3 more to go. I'm using a single circular, and I've pulled out, I'm using the magic loop technique. So I've just pulled out the excess about halfway along. And the knits are in the camel color. So I'm going to start with the knits. I'm just going to, usually on the first stitch, I just pull it a little tighter because, you know, you don't want to have a ladder where the needles join. Okay, then the pearls are actually in the gray. So I've got to pull the gray to the front to do the 2 pearls. And it can go to the back. So I'm going to hold both yarns in my right hand and just swap which one I'm using. But I'm keeping the order of the 2 always the same. The gray is always coming from underneath the camel. I'm not twisting them around each other as I go. Just will make it look more consistent. If you twist them, like, hey, your back won't look as pretty. But also, the accent color, the pearl color, will pop a little bit more if it comes from underneath. There's some experiments people have done knitting the same pattern with one wool, swapping the order of the 2 wools, and it does actually make a difference. Very subtle, but it does make a difference. coming to the end of my third row of corrugated ribbing. Okay, so again, I get to the end of a row with magic loop. I drop it, I pull the knitting to the center so I can actually see it. Okay, here we go. So we've done three loops so far, 3 rounds so far. I got 2 more to go. And remember, the working wool is always coming off the back needle. So if you set it down, you go to the bathroom, you go to dinner, whatever, you come back, you forget where you are with your knitting, just orient it so that the working wool, the ends attached to the ball, are coming off the needle on the back. And then you're ready to knit onto the front. Well, knit the stitches from the front needle onto that end you're going to pull out. Okay. Grab my camel to do the first 2 knits. Again, I'm always taking the gray from underneath. So if you want to hold the gray in your left hand and, you know, if you're clever enough to purl continental style with the wool in your left hand, go for it. I often do the trick where I loop it around my neck and sort of twang it, but given that these rows are so short, it's like too much of a hassle. So I just keep them in my right hand, and my index finger does the work of sorting out which one I'm about to use. Moving it from the back to the front. Okay, end of the row. Drop the end, pull the stitches to the cable, flip it around. There we go. 3.5. Twist these a bit. Make sure my gray is always coming from underneath the camel. Okay. Corrugated ribbing is slow going. Okay. Coming to the end of row 4. Round 4, I should say. I'm doing rounds, not rows. Okay. End of round 4. We can double check here. Let's just look how many pearl bumps in a row we've got. 1, 2, 3, 4 pearl bumps in a row. So I just need to do one more row to give 5. And then we're done with corrugated ribbing till I do the neckline. And I always just pull the first few extra tight just to avoid having too much of a ladder there between where the needles join. Almost. Okay, it's the end of 4 1/2. And the last half row. Okay. Coming to the end of the corrugated ribbing. Last 2 ribs to go. Okay. That is the corrugated ribbing finished. So if I turn it around so we can see it. There's the old one. There's the new one. We match. Cool. I can break the gray. Done with the gray. I'll leave myself a tail. Gray is finished for the moment. And now, if I recall on the pattern, we start with a plain row. Yes, a plain row of camel. Plain row of knitting. I'm going to tuck the gray down inside. Flip it around. And as I get to finish this row, I think that's probably where I will stop for the night, folks. Been going for a couple hours now. Getting a little tired. Okay, So that is the first row of the pattern done. So I'm actually just gonna tick it off here. So actually, oops. Yeah. I've actually done that one. Bottom row is the plain run, so I've ticked it off. So I've got 5, 27, 30, about 50 rows of this sleeve. That's about how long it is. So I'll be working on that this week. Hopefully next week we'll have it done. If you come back and join me at this time, actually it'll probably be Sunday morning next week. Well, I don't know. I keep saying Sunday morning, but then never actually get in here today. Went for a bike ride instead. All right. Have a lovely week, everyone. Remember, if you want to go back and see something earlier, you can actually see earlier sessions. I archive them over to my YouTube channel, so you can see the knitting of the body over on YouTube. Have a lovely week, and I'll see you next Sunday. Bye.